Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derik, and today we are getting into the first video of 2022, and it is a deck update that I've been very excited to do. I kind of teased it in the commanders I'd want to bring to my holiday party video, that one of those on the list and maybe more is going to be getting a deck update. And it's actually insane that when I looked at the first time I deck tech this deck, it was been almost 2 full years. There are so many updates. I think of all the deck updates I've done, while the core structure is similar, all of the win cons have changed. There are so many amazing new cards that have been added to this deck, and I just couldn't not talk about it anymore. I've been playing it a lot recently, and it is my boy, the Buggyman, the Locust God, Buggyman #1. This deck is so much fun. It has been a deck I've played for a very long time. If y'all don't know, Amonkhet was when I first got into Magic. So when the Hour of Devastation Gods came out and these ridiculous, unreadable invocation frames came out, well, everyone had mixed feelings. My little inner 7-year-old that loved Yu-Gi-Oh and random Egyptian looking things freaked the hell out, loved it, and I was all about these. So I actually have all 3 invocation buggy gods built as decks that I play, and this is one that I just can't stop playing recently. So yeah, we're gonna go in. I'll talk a little bit about kind of where it was previously. I'll link the previous video in the description to kind of get an idea. I watched it recently. I'm unrecognizable. I have a bald head and I don't think any facial hair, so still me, I promise. I just got lazy with the self-grooming in the last couple years. Apparently 2020 kind of did that to all of us. But yes, I'll reference that video, kind of talk about where the deck was, the direction I took it, why I made the changes, and really just some of the most amazing new cards. That's really the biggest emphasis for me. There's been so many cool cards printed in the last couple years that it's really just reignited my love for this deck. But before we get too far into it, there's gonna be some crazy cards you're gonna want to pick up in here, some of all those new goodies that have been printed over the last couple years. Not all of them are broken, some of them are just the right amount of spice. And if you want any of those, head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is phenomenal. Anything you're looking for, you can find there. Believe me, I got all types of alternate frames I'll be putting on the screen, all types of foils, this and that. If you're looking for any of that, you can find it on TCG Player. And if you use the affiliate link down in the description below, it'll help support the channel in the process. We really do appreciate all the help. But let's jump into this. Now, I mentioned the card frames, all that. This is my personal deck list, so if it looks on the expensive side, or I've had a lot of these older cards for a long time, well before they were way too expensive. So this is not necessarily a deck tech in the sense of pick this exact list to make. I'm going to point out some budget options for some of the ridiculously priced cards, because honestly, this deck can be built for pretty cheap. You don't need all the extra stuff, and especially for the Locust God, there have been so many effects that work well with him printed in the last few years. This deck can be built on quite a low budget compared to what it used to be in the past. Before we jump into the categories though, really the biggest difference between this deck, besides all the new cards, is kind of took it in a slight different direction. Previously, it was kind of your standard Locust God build with an emphasis on self wheels as opposed to wheeling everyone, kind of to care more about the good of the table. This one is actually much more of a spell slinger deck. I think I'm running 35 instants and sorceries in this, and a few cards that are really key to the deck that care about instants and sorceries and copying instants and sorceries and things like that. So it is very much a spell slinger take on the Locust God. I found myself really, when I played the deck, other creatures I just didn't want. All I cared about was getting the Buggyman out, keeping the Buggyman there, and doing all the shenanigans with said Buggyman. I guess one last thing before we jump into the categories, might help if I actually talk to y'all about who the Buggyman is, because while me and the Buggyman have a great relationship and are kind of besties going back a while, y'all might not know what it does, and because I put the invocation on the screen, you damn sure weren't able to read what it does. So the Buggyman is for a red and a blue for a 4/4 buggy that has a lot of text on it. It has the normal Hour of Devastation God text. When it dies, end step, you can go ahead and bring it back to your hand. So we want those sack outlets. We do not want this to get exiled. We don't want to pay Commander Tax 6. There's already a lot of mana in an Is It deck. It has the text where I think we get to either loot or rummage, one of the two, for paying 4 mana. We don't really worry about that too much as backup, but obviously most importantly, whenever you draw a card, you get a 1/1 insect token with flying and haste. Why these things have haste, I don't understand. It is just completely unnecessary. And I feel like with Xyrus, they realized the mistake where they made a similar commander, except with just snakes on the ground. Now we got Locust in the air, but the haste is insane. It's one of those things where it turns this deck from powerful to just, I'm not gonna lie, a little bit obnoxious at times. Because you wheel a few times, not only do you have crazy ETBs that go off with some of your other effects, but you just immediately can swing out in the air and kill people. It's a very, very powerful commander. And this is probably, I would say, my meanest deck. And we'll get into some of the cards that make it that way when we get into the cards, but I would say this is probably my strongest and quote-unquote meanest deck, and that it can just win out of nowhere if left unchecked. And most of my other decks need some turns to ramp up. This can just happen where blam, just shitting out insects, vomiting insects through all orifices. body hose and shit gets crazy. So whatever it is, this is a very powerful deck, and even on a budget, when we get in some of those options, it can still be really, really strong. But yes, finally getting into those creatures. Now, based on the initial deck list, I really trimmed all the fat. This is the bare minimum for creatures. It's explosive card draw effects like Toothy or Jace's Archivist, things like that, where it's either repeated or huge card draw effects, and then big payoffs that can serve as backups to the Buggyman if for any reason he's not available. So stuff like Psychosis Crawler or Niv Mizzet Perun. Call him Nivy P because I can't say that word right. So Nivy P's in there to really just go ahead and get everything going just in case the Buggyman's not there. But yeah, it's bare minimum with these creatures. We really want the emphasis on the instant sorceries. But with the artifacts, there's really two big it's just a lot of ramp, honestly. It's just a whole bunch of ramp. We want a lot of mana rocks. We have a 6 CMC commander. It's a really low to the ground deck. Our average CMC is under 3, which I don't really like stompy shit, so that's not the norm for me. But it's very low to the ground outside of the commander. But we still want to be able to ramp up to the commander and always be able to cast it because it's a little commander dependent. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels, pun intended, and not really doing much. So we do want to be able to have that. Now, there's a couple notable exclusions and inclusions that I made. So some of the cards that I've added, one is Primal Amulet, which is actually the inspiration for going this direction with the deck with all the instants and sorceries. I honestly don't even know what language it's in. It's like a foreign language card, but it's foily, and I think it's one of the Ixalan promos. I don't remember how I even ended up with this thing, but it's freaking beautiful, and I love it, and I just needed to put it in a deck, so this was the one that I decided, you're going in this direction, you're going to be a Spell Slinger deck, so I can play this pretty card. And this has really transformed it. I didn't want this to be a Storm deck. I didn't want to, even though that's like a copy effect, I have a few fork effects and copies, but I didn't want anything like 1,000 Year Storm or anything like Swarm Intelligence where you're constantly copying things, mainly because I have a rule with Commander. I like to play decks that I can play while I've had a few drinks. I like to have it simple enough to where I can just pilot it, having a good time, having conversation, maybe a little tipsy, but also complicated enough to where I can think a little bit because I want my brain to work just a little bit. So I got to find that happy place. And for me, going full Storm, it's just too much thinking for me. I feel like it bores my opponents to death. I feel like this is the happy medium to get some of those explosive copy effects without just going full Storm and kind of going too crazy with it. Now, the other two inclusions are two newer cards that were not around at the time I had done the last deck tech that are some of my favorite cards, period. One is Midnight Clock. This card is freaking awesome. I love it to death. Put this in decks it doesn't need to be in. I just get a kick and joy from putting my little dice on there and counting to 12. I love it so much. I don't know why I get so much joy from it, but honestly, that's the reason I run it in decks that don't even care about wheeling. Sometimes it's really inconvenient because you don't even know what you're going to draw by the time you will. It's on your upkeep, so sometimes you lose stuff you care about. I don't give a shit about any of that. I just really like it because I want to put my little dice there. It's a whole little mini game I get to play and count and draw. Fucking great time. And with the Locust God, it just kind of feeds into the whole thing and you get to wheel. And on the turn it goes off, if it goes well, damn is it good, because the dice go off, you shuffle, you shuffle, draw 7, and no mana was spent on that turn to do it, so you can really get explosive turns going if all goes well. And the other one is Strixhaven Stadium, another 3 CMC rock. I'm a huge fan. I've talked about him a ton. 3 CMC rocks with all these cool abilities. My favorite thing that's happened to Magic since I started playing. I love them. 3 CMC rocks is kind of my happy place. It's the pace that I enjoy playing at, and having all these incentives to play them has been freaking awesome. So yeah, Strixhaven Stadium is great. Most decks, if you hit somebody with 10 creatures, you're going to kill them anyway. In this deck, we have so many insects that hitting with 10 probably is just going to do 10 damage. So this is a really cool, it's a good give and take. It incentivizes people to attack you too, to try to get those counters down. It's a whole little mini game within the game. And just for the same reason I love Midnight Clock, I love this because it does create that mini game dynamic. And I think for me, Commander's at its best when little things like that are going on. Now the exclusions, what did I take out from the last list that's important? 2 important cards. One is Ashnod's Altar. If you notice, I actually took that out of the list. This deck is explosive and powerful enough where the whole Skull Clamp Ashnod's Altar combo just felt like too much. It honestly just, this deck can already win out of nowhere without people being ready, and it just felt like it wasn't fun for me to just, I've pulled off the combo enough times that once I clamped an Ashnod's Altar and went Infinibugs, it just wasn't exciting anymore, and I found myself kind of like sandbagging and just not casting either of those cards if I drew them because of the fact that the other one was in there. So I didn't want to go in that direction. I took that out. And I also took out Mana Crypt. I've been taking, every time I try to put this in a deck, it gets taken out. I'm not a fan of playing with Mana Crypt. I have no problem playing against it. It just feels like when I use it and those turns where I get it turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, it throws me so far ahead. And in a deck like this, it's already powerful. I just feel obnoxious when I do it. There's a lot of decks where I think Mana Crypt is so good in. I mean, my friend Colby, he plays it in like a Sun Quan deck and what's the other deck that I think it's like a Clothis deck. He has a few decks that aren't necessarily the highest in power level, and I feel like they need that extra speed, so Mana Crypt is great. In this deck, for me, it feels like I'm doing way too much. I'm already at an advantage with a broken commander like the Locust God. Trying to race out with fast mana seems like too much. I prefer things like Mana Vault, where it's like a ritual effect to race out, but you don't get that advantage every turn. So I went ahead and made those cuts. I said, like, this is like my meanest, strongest deck, but it just felt like those were doing more than I wanted to do in the game with a commander of this power level. Now, the enchantments are super similar. I really didn't change much because the enchantments were kind of bare minimum to begin with. I had to cut a few to make room for more instants and sorceries, but the Goblin Bombardments, Impact Tremors, Mana Echoes, Mind Moil, the basics that you're going to see the number 1 through whatever 4 in EDH rec for the Buggyman. I'm kind of basic. I had to run those. Those are really just so powerful and kind of stapley that they're like a comfort zone to put in this deck. But there are a few new cards that really did open things up. I love Teferi's Ageless Insight. This has been a great card, especially because in the past, Alhammar's Archive was really expensive. I don't even know how much it costs now. But this is like a cheaper version, mana value wise and money wise. It draws all the cards we never cared about the life gain. It's just a really, really great effect. And you don't want a ton of doubling card draw effects that I found in this, because you draw a bunch of those, but you have no way to draw the cards. They're useless. But this is just such an efficiently costed one. It is great to have in here. I also love, no surprise, Underworld Breach. Now, I know this is like a very combo-y. I'm sure it's used in a lot of CEDH things. I found myself cutting this from a lot of decks because I think it is better when being used for combos, and kind of just trying to do recursion things with it doesn't always work out if you're not actively filling the graveyard. This deck, I love it in because what it essentially allows us to do is just wheel, and then for however much mana we have, we can keep wheeling with alternative effects. Now, I know there's definitely whether it's like, I think there's probably something you can do like wheel Dockside and something. I didn't want to run Dockside in this deck. I'm not trying to do all that, but it lets you do combo-y things. But even when used in a quote-unquote fair setting, if you have 9 mana available, or I guess 11 mana, you can use this for 2. You can wheel 3 times with this, with the same card. That is incredibly powerful, and it's a great, great late game payoff. And even early game, we have a lot of cheaply costed instants and sorceries. We can get access to those to recur them. I mean, it's Red Yawgmoth's Will. Card is freaking crazy, and it does work in the deck. Also, Flavor Win if you run the opposition with all the locusts on it, the little invocation one. There's buggies everywhere. The card's kind of annoying. I actually don't use it a ton, but it's got bugs in it. I could not run it. It's the whole Plague of Locust thing. I felt bad if I didn't, so it's very beautiful and very much in there. Now with the sorceries, these are very similar and just stuff added on to the initial list. Some of the biggest win cons in this deck are now in the sorcery slot that were not a part of this list. The game winning step is going to be very different from what it used to be, the way this deck is now run, and I'm going to save a lot of these big sorceries for then. But in the meantime, it's a lot of just wheel effects, but what I did move more towards is very low mana value, just cantrips and draws, so Careful Studies and different things like Get Probe and whatever effects like that you want, like 1 mana scry draw a card or Serum Visions, all those different type of effects through in here, because I wanted to basically, early game it's a good way to set yourself up, and late game there's some times where you just need an extra bug or two to kind of be a little spark to get things going, and I found having that available for a mana or two. Basically all these effects have add bugs to your board added onto them, and it's really cool to have those to kind of get yourself going, be able to filter through cards and pick the cards that you need. Now if you look at my list, one of the best things that's happened for Buggyman decks in recent years has been just, we have so many wheel effects now in Magic. You can essentially just go and just like sort price low to high and build it for a way better budget. So ignore the Time Spiral and the Wheel of Fortune in this deck, because those are just cards I've had from back before they were a month's rent, back when they were much more manageable. Just cut those. Those really don't matter. We have, whether it's Wheel of Misfortune or the new Change of Fortune is a card, I think it's called, different things like that, or Wheel of Fate or Reforge the Soul. They're not necessarily cheap cards, but they're way cheaper than these are, so you can kind of just pick the cheapest wheel effects, because this is not the deck that, while the mana value is low, it's not dependent on, you don't need the most hyper efficient wheels. The Locust God is so broken on his own. Having to pay an extra mana here or there for a wheel effect is not going to make the deck any less fun, or really not that much less powerful. So I would just say go with the most budget wheels, so stuff like Windfall, Wheel of Misfortune. I know Wheel of Misfortune is a huge pain in the ass. I've seen people kind of just Sharpie over the miss and just use it as a Wheel of Fortune proxy. whatever makes you happy. I like the text on it, but I know it can get confusing. But yeah, stuff it with the cheapest wheels you can. We just have too many options not to go budget at this point. And with the instance, we have so much interaction. We have a lot of different bounce spells, counter spells, protection, all of these different things. And it's similar, but there's a few that we added that are just so good in here. Bulb Bend might be my favorite addition in the deck, just because it's basically, it's like a deflecting swat, but for like 30 cents or something ridiculous, and you just have to pay a red instead of no mana. You can basically just change the target for a single red mana when the Buggyman's out, which is insane. And then you can just run whatever package of counter spells. I'm only running like 4 or 5. I didn't want to go too heavy. You do need to protect the Buggyman. I am running a Fierce Guardianship in here. Again, personal list. I added that on because I ended up buying the Precon a while back because the Precon was cheaper than Fierce Guardianship was. That's not necessary. It really isn't, just because most times, like, you can just get a Swan Song or just run a random normal counter spell. This deck is not mana hungry. Keeping mana up really isn't a big deal. So it's going to be whatever counter spells you want. It's not like the type of deck where you're always going to be tapped out needing protection. If you run, especially if you build it low to the ground with these instant sorceries, yeah, never going to have to worry about, even if you're playing like a Dissipate or something, holding 3 mana up is not the end of the world. Some of my other favorite new additions, Divergent Transformations has been an insane card, or Divergent Transformation. This is great removal in a pinch if you need it for your opponent's creatures, because it's exiling cards. No matter what's attacking, you can protect yourself, which is great at instant speed. But what I really like doing is almost polymorphing your bugs. I mentioned we only have like 6 or 7 creatures, and they're all incredibly important to what we do. Just being able to spend 4 mana and just get rid of 2 bugs and get 2 of your best creatures in play is absolutely insane. It's basically all I use the card for. And it's really, if nothing's going well, you really need to tutor those pieces out. It's kind of a fun little roulette game to see what 2 creatures you hit and just cheat them into play. And the last instant is a card that I found myself putting in almost every red deck, Valakut Awakening. Love this. It's just the MDFCs are so great. It's just a land. You have the reshuffle effect. It was made for this deck. We were a deck that I'm way lower on my land count than I usually am because we have so many looting effects and card draw effects. So having this flexibility on a land is crazy. And it really just kind of captures the direction this deck went into, of kind of getting just efficient in the boundaries, and while getting rid of some of the more broken combo-y things, trying to be consistently powerful in a slightly more fair way, if that makes any sense at all. And cards like this have really helped me smooth it out and not have so many non-games when I'm trying to bring the Buggyman out. And with the land package, I don't think it's changed at all. Like, honestly, it's basically the same thing. Just run, it's 2 colors. You can run whatever basics you want. I have a very optimized mana base, so to speak, in this, just because, yeah, this is one of my pet decks I've been playing for a long time, but basics are fine. Yeah, it's really the only thing to be careful with is in this deck. Some of these wheel decks can end up very intensive on blue or red pips, so just make sure you count your mana symbols correctly, because that's something I didn't do in the past with this deck and got screwed with it. So make sure that's good. Outside of that, yeah, you can just run your basic stuff like Cephaly Coliseum and Mikokoro and Mikokoro. I cannot pronounce words. Whatever that word is going to be on the screen. Different things like that can help you draw cards in a pinch to get things going are great, but those can be relatively cheap. Yeah, but you don't need to worry about too many duels and things, which is why I love 2-color decks. I guess the last one, a lot about lands. 1 land, High Market. I did not realize this card's like $1 now. Holy shit, this card used to be like expensive. Like, I remember having I think it was like $5-6 before. High Market's $1. Go buy a bunch of those. Those are great. Especially good in here. We don't have a ton of sack outlet options, which are really important for our commander because we don't want it to get exiled. High Market is the just most beautiful, greatest option. It's on a land. It's $1 now. Definitely throw that in the deck. So you want that sack out on a land, and we are in blue and red, so it's not like when you're playing the Scarab God where we have every sack outlet imaginable available. This is more limited, so definitely put that in there. That's gonna do it for all the categories. Now let's move on to the best part of every deck tech, and in this case, the buggiest, the Buggyman's game-winning step. How are you about to win the game with this deck? Now, with previous deck updates, it was kind of like ranking the most important things or talking about it in different ways. I just want to go straight into a game-winning step for this one, because yeah, the game-winning steps is so different. There's so many different ways to win than previously, and I want to kind of focus on that. So we'll go with the basic way first, get it out of the way. Most basic way is just with the buggies, and this is with the same way as previously, where you're wheeling, doing a bunch of crazy stuff, getting a bunch of bugs, attacking with them, sacking them to Goblin Bombardment, or Impact Tremors, or Perforos, and just kind of the basic token red strategy to go ahead and win. It's a lot of fun, but the importance to me is kind of how you get there. Now, the second way to win the game in this deck is just crazy. It's taking advantage of all the instants and sorcery synergies we have and doing some crazy stuff with it. Whether you're running something like Mizzix's Mastery and just casting a bunch of stuff out of your graveyard, honestly, if you get this out, you're probably going to win. You can just go ahead and wheel and wheel and wheel and get a lot of wheels. We have so many in the deck. You're going to get so many card draw effects that casting this a lot of time is going to create an explosive turn just to flood the board with bugs and get your whole Locust Plague going. And now another card within this category that is one of my favorite cards that has been printed in the last few years. This thing is insane. It's Surge to Victory. And it's, you know, kind of instant and sorcery based because you need one in your graveyard, but it pumps all your bugs by the CMC of an instant or sorcery. And then you get to cast it every time a bug hits. This is, if you hit this with like a reshuffle effect, like a Winds of Change or something, it's just going to be game over. You're going to just, I don't even want to do the math for how many bugs you're going to end up with. All of these bugs entering, all of this damage because they're all getting buffed. I can't imagine do this with like a time spiral or something insane. Stuff will, like, I won't be able to do the math, but it's just going to be lethal on board. This is one of my favorite cards. This is insane. I haven't seen it a ton. So I'm surprised by that. It seems incredibly broken, but every time I draw this, I get so excited. Every time I try to cast it, I get so excited. It just creates some of the most insane winning board states I've ever seen, and it is an incredibly broken card. And the last way to win the game is going to be with a card called Strixhaven Stadium. I already talked about it. Look, I like sports, and I don't care who knows. Woo, go sports ball. It's such a fun card. It is just one of those, it creates the mini game within the game. I feel like it's pretty fair because you're basically picking off one player at a time as opposed to just killing everyone, which is kind of what the Buggyman's usually doing. And I feel like this whole game winning step, while they're separated, kind of all represent one thing for me, in that it's awesome to find. The wheel decks in the Buggyman can get kind of stale for people. I've heard people playing them and it getting old because you kind of win the same way every time. And finding cool ways to use a Surge to Victory and finding cool targets to exile with it allows you to get some variation in the way you're winning each time. Or using a Mizzix's Mastery and not necessarily knowing what cards are in your graveyard to see what you can get and how you can go off and have an explosive turn, and really casting things in different combinations, or whether it's a Strixhaven Stadium and trying to win through getting these counters on while people try to attack you back. To me, it's adds a little variety, and it's a variety that I feel like the Buggyman was missing for me previously, and it's really just made it that much more fun every time I get to play it. That's gonna do it for this week's deck tech / deck update. I know we didn't take a trip to Phyrexia this week. Kind of ashamed of myself. I really tried hard to infect in this deck. I'm not gonna lie. There was all types of ways I was trying to incorporate it, but it was a reach. And so, you know what? We'll just have to put extra infect in the deck next week. Don't worry. Not many decks I play don't have infect, so we will find a way to give. We'll take a little extended vacation into Phyrexia next time. But yes, let me know what you think about the Buggyman. I know this is a very kind of controversial commander in the sense that some people really hate wheels, like really hate wheels. I love to play them. I love to play against them, to draw cards. I always love to see the cards in my deck. They're so pretty, and I want to look at them. So when people wheel me, I just get excited to see more cards. But let me know what you think. Is the Buggyman kind of one of your no-go commanders, or have you found it to be fun over time? And what is your deck that has gotten the most spicy updates over the last couple of years with some of the awesome cards printed? Let me know in the comments below. As always, huge shout out to the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. Always thank you for sticking with us and believing in what we do. We got some spicy content coming out soon. Don't worry about that. And yeah, plenty of stuff to come. I'm actually going to get into a string of deck updates. I have quite a few scripted. Some technical difficulties has made them kind of go on delay for a little bit, but I think it's 2 or 3 deck updates that I have scripted and ready to go. I'm trying to get those out before we get into the new Kamigawa stuff and all the new stuff in the new year. So look forward to those. I've been spending way too much. Some people make New Year's resolutions. I sit there and update Magic decks all day. So yeah, different lives, different choices. Either way, see y'all next time.